This is the Trust Effect. And today I want to talk about the instability of language. And when I was sitting back and kind of assessing what I wanted to talk about today, I realized there was nothing that I could cover where the language being used to describe certain events that are happening and things that are taking place and realities that are being described, that we can't actually start having these conversations until we understand how we process language, how it forms, how we process it, and how that actually begins to direct our actions, which is ultimately how we begin to participate in this world. And it's always been a really fascinating topic for me. And at the root of language for me is actually the Black's Law Dictionary. Absolutely. Oh, this is going to be a fun one. Welcome. At the root of language for me is frequency medicine. And if you've watched any of my other lives, if we've had these conversations before, I went through significant burnout in 2017. And part of my healing journey, and a big part of it, was actually participating in sound healing. I was living in Montreal and I found this amazing sound healer. If there's anyone in this chat that is in that area, the Resonance Temple, Sarah Surrenders, the most incredible woman I've ever met. And she intimately showed me and taught me what it means to use frequency to unlock emotion in the body and begin to make sense of what we're feeling and how vibration affects thought, which affects words, which affects action. And oh, you're so burned out. I've yeah, that's really hard. Burnout is maybe one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. And I've had it in multiple iterations, but 2017 was my full body burn, my full body crash. And we're talking, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't function, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It was very, very intense. So yes, emotions are energy stuck in the body. So what I started experiencing when I really started getting deep into the somatics, and I can look at all of the different work that I've done. So one of the reasons why I've created Sovran Wellth and the ecosystem and the framework that I have is because I hit the walls of everything. Like if you could do like family systems work, inner child healing, physical movements, somatics, like all of it. But yet I could never find an organizing force that could tie it all together. And you start to become so overloaded and sometimes over pathologized with like what I call the diagnosis psychosis of all of these terms, that it can become like a heavier burden on you to try and kind of muddle your way and pull your way out of it. And so when I was doing the sound healing, what became abundantly clear to me was I started being able to map. And I was doing a lot of body mapping, so getting really still and really quiet. And when a thought would hit my mind, it was like, where do I feel it in my body? And so that was for me the reverse engineering of understanding how energy and feelings and emotions that are locked in the body translate into thought, but I had to get there backwards. And that brought me deep into epigenetics and understanding what was mine and what was someone else's, what came from my family, my environment, my epigenetics, and starting to alleviate myself, I would say, of the burden of feeling weighed down by all of the bad decisions and choices that I've made over my life. But so through that journey, where am I at here? Sorry, my brain just exploded and went in a million different directions. What I really started learning during that time was that the words that I was using matter, right? And if you're in any kind of behavioral psychology and you understand how you speak to yourself and the stories that we tell ourselves, why they matter, that's one thing. But then it's language. And having spent quite a few years working in the legal and financial industry, working both at one of the largest firms in Nova Scotia, then moving offshore to one of the largest legal fund and fiduciary firms in the world, I started seeing really interesting patterns around the words that we use and how scope and definition and language can expand or contract based on desired outcome. And so once the pandemic hit and I started going down the rabbit hole deeply of language, how it's used to coerce, manipulate, move, and how, to your point that you mentioned about Black's Law, how the definitions in the Black's Law dictionary really differed from what we were experiencing through media narrative. And I started getting really curious because then in that moment, the entire lexicon that I used in my career came flooding into focus. And I started going, oh my God, like there's something much bigger here that we need to, as a collective, individually first, but as a collective, start getting really clear on the words that we're using, because language has just become riddled with garbage. There's so much noise. To quote, Steve Jobs, when we're looking at signal versus noise, we're filled with so much noise. There's so much clutter in our language that we don't know how to be clear. We don't know how to be concise. We don't know how to really articulate our thoughts and our experiences well. And we use words based on assumption of what we believe they mean, not necessarily how they're actually defined, and that those assumptions and presumptions create the reality that we experience. And it was this really interesting aha moment for me. And that's when I started actually working with words and language as a frequency medicine. And how could I begin to articulate myself and convey ideas and concepts in ways that became healing? Because for me, I'm very intellectual. I'm very in my head. And language has always been my friend since I was a young child. And it's something that I find comfort in because I've always been able to articulate myself relatively well and navigate complex systems. So I wanted to kind of start with a section in my book that I wrote. And the book that I have is The Structural Language of Trust. And it's where I felt it was really important when we're looking at trust and how we evaluate it and recognize it, that we have to look at the language that keeps binding us to the people, places, and things that are what we believe controlling our reality and controlling the narrative that is shaping how we are experiencing the world around us. And I thought it was really interesting, and I don't really want to go too deep into this, but I've been reading watching some interesting accounts about a recent, I guess we'll call it, propaganda project that the CBC just pushed through. And it made me realize that I'm also in my own bubble, because I thought it was just kind of common knowledge that the CBC network and broadcast system is 100% propaganda and you actually cannot trust a single thing they say. But based on this, I'm realizing that incredibly intelligent people who I thought would know better didn't. And it's also incredibly sophisticated. And this is why understanding language because that is our primary communication tool, even though we do communicate through energy first and feelings and intuition, and your gut is telling you what you should and shouldn't do, whether you're paying attention or not. But language is how we interface with each other. It's how we build relational dynamics, and it's important. It's very, very important. It's the root of all miscommunication. So in my book, I have a chapter called The Instability of Words. And I say, if the architecture of trust exists everywhere, which it does, and so for me, the architecture of trust is a formula of capacity, function, governance, and continuity. So do you know who you are, what you're holding, what you can hold? Do you understand the function of what you are doing? Do you understand the rules, regulations, laws, etc., that the capacity and function are required to operate? And can you function inside of those reliably over time, inside the bounds of those particular mandates? Because trust, the actual formula of trust, as in capacity, function, governance, and continuity, it exists at all times. It's always at play. Continuity isn't something that just either exists or it doesn't. Continuity is what is happening continuously over time. It's whether or not it's trustworthy or not. It's whether or not capacity, function, and governance is being honored reliably over time. And continuity can give you incredibly trustworthy results, or it can show you exactly where structures have been built to self-protect and self-insulate and reliably and continuously erode and degrade trust. So when I look at the trust effect, it's simply the effect and the outcome of those 4 items. It's not necessarily whether they're good or bad. It's a diagnostic and evaluative tool. So if the architecture of trust exists everywhere, a natural question follows. Why is it so difficult to see? The difficulty is not that the structure is hidden. In most cases, it's operating in plain sight. The difficulty lies in the language we use to interpret what we are seeing. Language does more than describe reality, it organizes perception. Every sentence quietly arranges relationships between actors, actions, responsibility, and consequence. Over time, those patterns become the structures through which the mind interprets and perceives the world. When the language surrounding a system becomes unstable, perception becomes unstable as well. English provides a particularly complex landscape for this. It's one of the most widely used languages in the world, which in my experience and most people, it is the language of commerce. And commerce is your legal, financial, and government systems. Yet it's also one of the most structurally chaotic. And over centuries, it's absorbed vocabulary from many different linguistic traditions, leaving behind a language filled with overlapping meanings, contradictions, and words that sound identical while pointing to entirely different ideas. A single sound can represent multiple meanings. A single word can shift its interpretation depending on context. 2 people can believe they are using the same language while organizing completely different realities around the same word. An example that I'll use is if you go back into a live, I think it's number 3 that I did, where I was talking about my experience with the IWK hospital. We had conflicting understandings about the word claim. So in this context, the hospital believed, at least in their narrow definition of it, that I did not have a claim because I had not yet filed with the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. However, the entire reason I was having a conversation with the legal department in the first place is because I issued a notice to them that had damages attached to it, which they were required to then hand to their insurance company. And when they handed it to the insurance company, a claim was opened. So while they were trying to deny that I did not have a claim because they were narrowly defining the word claim as bespoke to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia and a specific court filing, by nature of the fact that we were having a conversation in the first place, verified that there was a claim at play because the insurance company had been engaged. and insurance companies are engaged through a claim process. So these are just one of the little things that becomes really sticky and that we have to be aware of when we are having conversations. And if I didn't know how the word claim could be skewed, I may not have had the conversation that I did with the legal department going forward. So trust itself is a good example. The word constantly appears in conversations about leadership, relationships, institutions, and governance, yet the meaning attached to it shifts from moment to moment. Sometimes it refers to belief in another person, sometimes it refers to emotional safety, loyalty, morality, or shared value, and sometimes it's referring to legal or financial structures. These interpretations often overlap without ever fully stabilizing. And that's really important because at the end of the day, and the reason why I'm so fascinated with language and how the structure of trust and the words that we use appear in our financial legal systems or commercial systems is because those are man-made constructs. They were built from the inside out. It's not like someone just magically was dropped into these structures. They have been created by humans. They're animated by humans. There's something very specific that we have to start looking at about how we are processing information from the inside out to allow these realities to continue through our participation, whether it's active or passive. And so when a word carries many possible meanings, it becomes difficult for perception to organize itself clearly around the structure the word is attempting to describe. And so one of the most important things that I learned during the pandemic was the concept of assumption and presumption, and how specifically in Canada, our legal system is deeply organized around assumption and presumption, and how when you assume wrong and through your tacit consent, through your acquiescence, through your silence, you agree to the terms of something you had no idea you were agreeing to, it becomes vitally important that you do not assume incorrectly. And even our legal system and our legal structure is a precedent-based structure. And precedent is who can make the best argument, who can make the best assumptions with the evidence that they have, with the various perceptions and perspectives that they're able to collect, who can set a precedent. But before there was ever a precedent in a court, there was a precedent within the human. It's the reputation you have with yourself. It is the habits and actions that you develop over time. That's your personal precedent. And so I'm always constantly trying to unwind all of these overlapping ideas and structures to best understand, as anyone can, I think, how what is being reflected back to me came to be. Because everything feels like a bit of a chicken or the egg scenario. And I deeply understand the idea of reciprocal conditioning, right? So what you believe you see, and what you see reinforces what you believe. It's that perception, projection, perspective loop. And when you become acutely aware that that exists, it begins to change how you see the world. And to me, that is the definition of being awake. I think awake has been co-opted by a lot of conspiracy-minded ideas. And to me, a conspiracy is just something that hasn't been proven yet. There's a reason conspiracy to commit a crime exists. It's not like it's a fake idea. But it can become a little ungrounded. And I've seen it a lot inside of different sovereignty networks and a lot of kind of flag in the ground that I've been a part of, that I've moved through, different notice writing groups. I feel like I've really run the gamut when it comes to these different areas. And at the end of the day, I've said many times, wherever you go, there you are, that you are the only common denominator of your life, and whatever you're not changing, you're choosing. And so when I had to get really honest with myself about my involvement with these groups, because it's a beautiful idea to be able to say, I'm not going to participate in this anymore, and I'm going to go over here, I'm going to build something new, I'm going to build my utopia, I'm going to live here, and life is going to be amazing. But again, wherever you go, there you are. You will bring your blind spots with you. And if you cannot begin to understand and self-correct where you're standing right now, how is that not going to bleed into something else? What exactly are you escaping? That hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, there is no over there. There is nowhere else you can go. All you can do is deal with what's in front of you right now. And what's in front of you right now is 100% determined by your perception and a really honest evaluation and accounting of how you are participating in what is showing up in front of you. So an additional layer of complexity appears in the way the nervous system processes language. When a word is spoken, the body responds to the sound and the rhythm of that word before the mind organizes its spelling or dictionary definition. The tonal pattern arrives first, interpretation follows. Cymatics describes how sound frequencies move through matter and organize particles into visible patterns. Change the tone and the pattern reorganizes instantly. The particles themselves do not change, the structure shaping them does. This is why somatics and language were so fascinating to me, which is why once I could start hearing words and understanding how they were showing up in my body and really getting to the root of how language has shaped my nervous system, then I could start looking at how I could then respond differently to the words that I was hearing and then begin to expand and hold more perspectives at once when I'm hearing something. It really does change, I think, the multidimensionality in which you can approach a topic, which is really, really important because we do live in an incredibly binary society where we're often operating through either or, when what I've come to experience in my own life is that everything is actually a yes and. It's not black or white, yes or no. It's like, yes, this is happening, but this is also happening, and so is this, and so is this. And this is the ripple of the different perceptions and how they are proliferating outward. And we don't have control over how someone else reacts, responds, interprets what we're saying. But we do have a duty and an obligation to be as clear and concise as we possibly can, and as emotionally regulated and grounded as we can when we are attempting to convey information and emotion and thought. And nothing will teach you that more than your closest relationships. When you get into disagreements, when you feel dysregulated, when something hits the crunchy parts of you, and you have to attempt to communicate your way through those really uncomfortable feelings. And this is why, one of the reasons why I developed HALT and really started looking at the power of being able to witness what's happening through the lens of honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. Because when we have these communication issues, and when language gets muddled, and when emotions and somatics get attached to the words that we're using, it can send our relationships off the rails. And if you happen to have, to get into the diagnosis psychosis, different attachment wounds, so whether it's you're avoidantly attached, you could be anxiously attached. If you're anything like me, you're both, and that's its own private hell that you have to learn how to work through. Words become kryptonite in your body, and it can burn things down so quickly. So we have to really learn how to take deep accountability and responsibility for that, while also learning how to speak our truth and what matters to us in ways that may hit someone else's nervous system, that will hit their crunchy parts. And when it does, how do you learn not to self-betray? This is the yes and, right? Because sometimes we will say something and we fight to be right, When we see our truth hurts someone else or it makes them angry, we can either retreat, we can push back, we can have a myriad of reactions. And something I've learned in the last year, as I've been going through my own constant evolution, which it is a constant evolution. Like when you think you have this nailed, new levels, new devils. You are absolutely going to get smacked with something that you thought you could handle, and you might not be as prepared as you thought. But speaking a very hard truth to someone from a place of maybe more secure attachment, boundaries, and also understanding that the impact of your words can still hurt someone. And one doesn't negate the other, right? So can you stand in your truth, stand in what you mean, say what you mean what you say, but also understand that it can impact someone else negatively, and you have to hold space for that without apologizing necessarily for your feelings, but recognizing that they did have impact. And it's this tightrope. It's so hard to walk because that is where division comes in. And it's also how language becomes weaponized to divide people significantly over time, using very polarizing and partisan language that prevent us from being able to have that yes and evaluation of what's happening in front of us. Language behaves in a similar way within human perception. Words act like tonal structures that organize meaning, and when meaning attached to a word shifts, the pattern of perception shifts around it as it shifts as well. This creates both a challenge and an opportunity because when language becomes fragmented, perception fragments with it as well. You just have to look around the world right now. Everybody has a camp. Everybody has a lexicon. And that lexicon can either be attached to or villainized. There really isn't a lot of ambiguity in between. And it's why I'm always looking at the etymology of words, why I'm always going into deeper definitions, why I'm always attempting to try and expand the perception, but then also look at the underlying perceptions and perspectives that could shape it. And not to really attempt to influence or change anything, but just to have a better understanding for myself, so that when I'm looking around and hearing the news and looking at what is being shaped through the media and through government press releases around how we want the public to organize around perception, it becomes really important to be able to discern and parse through the language that is being used. There's a reason that PR and communications and marketing departments exist. It's to use language emotionally. I've spoken a lot about the villain victim hero loop, that the narrative of the hero's journey, Story Brand by Donald Miller, the way marketing is presented to fulfill one of those three roles, to allow you to see who's the victim, who's the villain, who's the hero, that the stories we tell ourselves and about other people and what we're experiencing, we've been conditioned to tell it within that lens of the villain, victim, hero, that we usually triangulate one of those three and include ourselves in that when we attempt to tell a story. Once you become aware of that and you try and tell a story without assigning a villain, victim, or hero, you will get tripped up. It's really hard because then you have to start using incredibly neutral language, and neutrality is not a strong suit right now in society. Understanding neutrality and the power of neutrality, it's not something that we are taught, right? There's a reason Switzerland is Switzerland. There's a reason they're neutral. I mean, we often joke in situations when there's conflict. It's like, I'm Switzerland. Keep me out of it. But Switzerland geopolitically plays a very, very, very important role. They must stay neutral. They can't be belligerent. Not when you look at the financial systems that sit inside of that country. It's impossible. They are neutral. Like, the geopolitics around neutrality is incredibly important when we start looking at human behavior and how we actually don't govern ourselves from a place of neutrality, and what actually begins to change when you do. And I learned that intimately during the pandemic, when I started getting really clear on the language that I was using, attempting to decharge the words that I was using when I was corresponding with different political figures, corporations, businesses, people with opposing views. When you can learn how to decharge and neutralize your language, everything changes. Everything changes. Specifically around the vaccine mandates, the masking mandates. I went from being attacked physically in public for not wearing a mask to almost becoming invisible when I started to understand neutrality. It's like I could walk through a grocery store and people couldn't see me anymore. It was the most bizarre thing I think I've ever experienced. It was like this cloak of invisibility. And it came when I started to shift my language, because when I shifted my language, I shifted my thoughts, which shifted me somatically, which shifted me energetically. There's an intense symbiotic relationship between the words that we use and the frequency that we hold in our body and the energy that we push out into the world. Systems that might otherwise be understandable appear confusing or unpredictable because the words used to describe them no longer hold stable meaning. And at the same time, when language becomes structurally coherent, perception reorganizes very quickly. The mind begins to see relationships that previously appeared unrelated, and patterns that once felt mysterious suddenly become visible. And this is the purpose of Sovran Wellth Keys. Excuse my author stamp. Rather than inventing a new vocabulary, the keys, which are 71 definitions in this book, work with words that already exist in everyday English, and each key expands a familiar word so that the structural pattern it describes can become stable and recognizable. And the words remain familiar, but the meaning starts to deepen. This is where you go from either or into yes and. Over time, these words begin to function less like definitions and more like orientation points within perception. And they provide stable markers that allow the mind to reorganize the structural relationships operating inside the systems it encounters. And when language stabilizes in this way, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The world becomes easier to read. And so when I started really looking at this, one of my favorite words to actually look at was the word no. And does no really mean no? I don't know that it does. No is a condition, has conditions attached to it. If you think of those charts where it's like, here's a question. If it's yes, go this way. If it's no, go this way. You always end up going somewhere. No never hits a dead end. If you talk to a computer programmer, you can't just code no into code. You'll end up with 404s. It can't reconcile. There's nowhere for it to go. If you say just no, there's nothing to do with that word. Because when you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. So what are you actually saying yes to when you say no? And that yes starts to move and create a myriad of different perceptions and perspectives. It was one of those really trippy experiences as well, because especially on the heels of the Me Too movement of 2018, where no means no, and it's just this very hard line. And yes, it is, but you have to qualify your no. You have to qualify no. It's not a complete sentence. And if we learned anything through the pandemic, No is absolutely not a complete sentence, and nor is it recognized by the higher powers. Because if you went into any of the legislation at that time, exemptions were baked into everything, and like exhaustive exemptions. So you could say no, but you had to qualify the exemption in order for that no to be heard. This is why everything becomes yes and instead. It's so interesting. And when I look at the province of Nova Scotia, which is where I'm at, and part of what I'm evaluating, it feels like an absolute dumpster fire here right now. Nova Scotia is a dumpster fire, especially when we look at it through the lens of trust. No one is doing what they say. Words are hollow, words are empty, and no one is being held accountable. I mean, anywhere in the world, but there's absolutely no accountability, and there's no mechanism for accountability at the end of the day. It's incredibly self-protective, but yet the deeper you dig into legislation and the deeper you dig into the language and the definitions and the expansions that sit there, there is inherent equity that sits in there. The problem is, again, continuity. Because definitions are narrowed, because language is heavily manipulated, because people only see what they want to see, and they can't hold the totality of perspectives that are required. What appears to be deep corruption is the predictable outcome of untrustworthy people operating over time. And there are course corrective methods that can start to bring things back into alignment, but the system is only ever going to reflect the caliber and the quality of the people that are animating it. And so that's why trust is an inside out proposition. It's why trust must be created and manufactured within before it can ever move outside of us. And Premier Tim Houston is an interesting case study for me. And the reason he's an interesting case study is because when you look at how he is operating and the way he is running the government in Nova Scotia, there's no transparency, heavy opacity, intense consolidation of power into the hands of a few people. But when you zoom out and you take a 50-foot view and you look at the fact that his entire career began at Deloitte, that he was in Bermuda, that he worked offshore for almost his entire career until he came back and entered Nova Scotia politics. And not only did he work offshore, he was working deep inside of the insurance and reinsurance markets, which really only became evident because of the Paradise Papers. His name appeared on the directorship slates for InterOcean Holdings, I think that's what it's called, InterOcean. And insurance, if anybody knows anything about insurance, is like a never-ending Russian doll, because there's absolutely nothing that operates in this world without insurance, and every insurance has an insurance. So there's insurance, reinsurance, reinsurance, reinsurance. It's just this insane, never-ending hole. But when you work in those spaces where the entire purpose of functioning offshore is for opacity, for minimal oversight, for consolidation of wealth and power, that is who we elected in. That is who got put into a position of power here. That is the lens, perception, and perspective that he came with as a leader to run this province. He, for all accounts, from what I can see, based on my experience, having been offshore and working with the ilk and alongside the Tim Houstons of the world, he's doing exactly what I would predict he would do from someone who was groomed and raised and trained inside of a highly protected, highly opaque, centralized, and consolidated system. And it's problematic. But no one can recognize it. They can't see it. They can't understand it. And they can't identify the language that he's using on a regular basis to see and map what's actually happening. And so, again, with much of what I do and why language is so important and why getting into neutrality and being able to hold such a neutral position, one of the reasons why it's so important is because not only does it decharge the situation, it also takes the focus off the personality and the person and onto the structure that they're operating inside. It takes the pressure off of, again, villainizing someone, villain, victim, hero, and looking at the pattern. Because if it's not Tim Houston, it's going to be someone else who is inside that same system, who has come in through that same system. I sit back and I look at our city council, and our city council is an absolute train wreck. Our mayor has sat at every level of government. There is deep conflicts of interest that exist at all levels right now in the province of Nova Scotia. But when you look at strictly city council, we have a mayor who used to be an MP, who held a cabinet position, who was Speaker of the House, whose predecessor was also a federal MP, who is now our Lieutenant Governor, which aka CEO of the province of Nova Scotia being the registered corporation with the SEC, operating inside of the governor and council, which is the power consolidation inside of the executive council, which is made up of all appointed bureaucrats. And while many of the appointed bureaucrats in there were elected into legislature, they don't have to be made a minister. It's customary. It's what we've typically and traditionally done, but it doesn't mean they have to do it going forward. So when it comes to trust, and where I'm going with this is that in the example, I would say, of the council, we have legacy council members that have been in there for 20 years. And you can make the argument that no one else is running against them. And people like to make the argument that they hold the institutional knowledge. But what if the institutional knowledge they hold is incorrect? Again, continuity. What if what they've been continuously doing over time is inherently corrupt, but they can't see it because they're deeply entrenched in it? Again, this isn't about the personality. This is about the integrity, though, of the decision making that's happening inside of these individuals. I've gone deep into our MGA, our Municipal Government Act, and there's absolutely no term limit for city council. But then my question is, if you are also someone who believes in serving the public, who believes in operating for the greater good, why must a term limit be imposed on you? How can you not recognize at one point that you've hit your threshold, that you've overstayed your welcome, that it's time for fresh blood to come in because you can only see what you can see? You know what you know and you don't what you don't. And the blind spots that I'm seeing inside of city council right now is insane. And we kind of have two camps. We have a camp of legacy counselors and then a new class. And the new class has publicly insinuated that they feel bullied and pressured by this legacy class who have deep, deep community connections. But more so than that, it's the business connections, it's the additional political connections. It's watching our mayor. Again, we have a mayor who used to be an MP, cabinet minister, Speaker of the House. Predecessor was an MLA, MP, then mayor. It's so weird to me that we're watching federal politicians move into municipal government. But when you understand the power of municipal government and that their jurisdiction, that their governance strategy, that what they are ultimately responsible for governing can only end up in the hands of the province and the feds if they cede their jurisdiction to them, but they don't know that they're doing it because we have these legacy class who don't understand how it's happening either. Because we have political ambitions, we have remuneration. Again, we have politicians that are treating office like a career instead of a public service. I don't know how we get out from underneath it. I don't know how we get out from underneath it unless we start building the trust within to be able to navigate it outside of us. And I think what's really interesting, and it's a position I never thought I would find myself in, but I have absolutely been asked to run for office, which I will absolutely never do. I've never had a political motivation or inclination in my life. I have people that are willing to fund election campaigns for me. I'm not willing to do it because I'm not willing to take the oath of office that would be required for me to sit in those positions, and the lack of transparency that it creates. That's my integrity coming through, saying, I'm not going to do this because I'm not interested in the games that you're playing. But also, the biggest issue that we have with our city council right now is that they are constantly ceding their jurisdiction to the administration. They are constantly kicking everything to the municipal solicitor, to the CAO, to the planning and development. They're always looking for reports. And the moment they do that, the moment they say, hey, I'm not sure about this, I want you to handle it, it's literally out of their hands. And in my experience, I had a massive issue with city council last year. And council was not responding. In fact, council handed my issue to the solicitor because there were serious legal implications. And the moment it went to the solicitor said, lawyer up, and the conversation stopped. And so I filed a code of conduct complaint, and not just a little code of conduct complaint. It was a 17-page summary with 115 pages of evidence. And the 115 page of evidence were email trails, 100% email trails between me and the legal department, with pages also representing the silence of the counselors, because at no point did a single counselor ever respond to anything. They put everything into the hands of the solicitor. When I filed my code complaint, I had it was so large that I couldn't put it through email, and I had to put it inside of a shared drive that had a full audit trail. And I watched that file get opened all over the country. And there were only two consultants on retainer with the city to adjudicate these claims. One was MC Advisory, which I was conflicted out of using because they're part of McGinnis Cooper, who I used to work for, and the other was Atlantic Workplace consultants, who happened to be legacy members of the DOJ and the DOC. And the biggest part of my complaint had to do with the conflicts of interest that exist inside of city council in the province, as to why my issues were persisting and why there was no remedy. But the biggest issue was that council never once responded, and that they had a fiduciary obligation to respond. And during this process, as I was watching my document get opened all over the country, the Minister of Municipal Affairs swooped in October 7th and removed the public's ability to file code of conduct complaints against council. We can't do it anymore. And so mine was grandfathered in because it was already an active process. But, and I shit you not, I still have to figure out how I can release all these documents without getting sued. The response that I got from the adjudicator, from the contractor, Atlantic Workplace, was that council sufficiently responded to me. And there's not a single email from a counselor. 135 pages. Not a single email from a counselor, but yet they responded accordingly. How does that happen? Because they weren't there to adjudicate the behavior of administration. They weren't there to adjudicate the conduct of the solicitors. They were there to adjudicate the conduct of the counselors. And the counselors were absent. There was and every single counselor, including the mayor, was sent every single piece of correspondence, and it was intercepted every time by the legal department, by the lawyer. The lawyer, who, by the way, would repeatedly remove all oversight from every email response she sent me. She would break the entire chain. And the clerk of the municipal council was copied on everything that I sent to ensure that the record was preserved, to ensure continuity of record. When you're dealing with ethics and morals like this, systems are going to fail. Systems are going to break. Continuity that I was talking about earlier around what we perceive as corruption, because people are doing what they've been taught, they're doing what they think they should be, they're acting in ways that perhaps over time their legacy wow, my words just went right out. The legacy members have taught them to act, but it's not honorable. It's not in integrity. It's absolutely in violation of their oath of office. And so the only way at that point to really start attempting to do anything is to look at that oath and the fiduciary and legal ramifications of breaching it. But to do that, you have to be able to now invoke, from what I can tell, the DOJ. And how do you do that when the person that's running your entire complaint process has over 30 years embedded in those spaces? What happens when the conflict of interest is so deep inside of the cabinet that there's absolutely no way that it could be adjudicated or looked at correctly without everybody self-incriminating? Who the hell is going to tell on themselves? No one. This is why it becomes incumbent on the public to be able to understand trust, to be able to understand the structure of trust, to be able to witness whether or not people are operating inside of their capacity, if they're functioning as that capacity requires that they do, what their governance structures are, what are the rules, regulations, oaths that they are bound to, and are they functioning in them continuously over time? And the answer is no. But the checks and balances are near impossible to correct inside of that structure. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier about the insurance and reinsurance markets and how liability is structured, we have the perfect premier to ensure that the institution never gets touched. Not from a liability standpoint, not with his knowledge of the reinsurance and insurance markets that cabinet so heavily relies on. I can see it very clearly in my issue with the IWK and the hospitals, where the Health Insurance Reciprocal of Canada cannot be touched unless they are compelled through the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. That's not the function of insurance. The function of insurance is not to be sued into oblivion, specifically inside of our public structures. But we're not looking at a democratic public trust structure. I'm looking at a well-managed, sophisticated vehicle that is structured very similar to what I've encountered offshore. But until you understand the language that operates inside of these legal and financial realms, and how to apply it from the inside out, like capacity, like jurisdiction, like contracts, agreements, governance, continuity. If we don't understand how to apply it to the human first, so that it can actually proliferate and ripple into our greater systems, because the human that thinks that they're just showing up every day, pushing paper, doing their job, can no longer tolerate what they're being asked to do, because it is out of integrity, because it does break trust. That's the pivot point. That's how things actually meaningfully change, as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, from what I can see. It's what's changed my life. It's what's irreparably changed me. I can never go back to seeing the world the way that I used to. Not when you start to understand the deep levels of self-accountability and self-responsibility that are required for trust to actually function in any meaningful way for the betterment of humanity. And it's why I keep having these conversations. It's why I'm so passionate about language. It's why, as I said at the beginning of this, words are medicine. Language is frequency medicine. The cymatics of the language that we use, the way that it affects our physical being, how that impacts our perception, our assumptions, our presumptions of what is happening in front of us, how it charges that either positively or negatively, how it pulls us out of that state of neutrality that Switzerland understands so well. It prevents us from really being able to see the forest through the trees and being able to take a beat, halt, pause, run through the honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust within ourselves to understand if what I'm looking at is true. Is it honest? Can I rely on it? Can I make decisions based on this? How is it shaping how I'm choosing to participate every day? It's also why I left the corporate world and why I had to. I could no longer function in those spaces. I could no longer look at what I was being asked to do every day and the greater impact that it had financially, economically, socially in the world. I could no longer be an active participant in that. It's also why I can look at the places that I've been. I was joking with my dad the other day. I was like, looking back, I kind of feel like I'm having a bit of a Forrest Gump moment, because like looking back, the places and spaces that I've been in don't make any sense. I never should have been and held the positions and been in the rooms that I've been in, but I have. And looking back, I can paint a really interesting kind of perspective. I can connect some really interesting dots. It highly informs what I'm looking at right now. And it's what allows me to move differently. And it's why I'm quite passionate about taking the information that I've learned in those spaces, not about specific cases and not about specific people, but patterns that I've witnessed, and Robin Hooding that for the general public. Can I take that information that I witnessed from the elites of the elite and make it digestible so that people can stop looping inside of the villain, victim, and hero narrative and actually start reclaiming agency and control over their own life, which actually allows others to do the same thing. And it starts to have a ripple effect, and it changes individuals, it changes families, it changes communities, it changes towns. Not overnight. It's going to take a minute. I don't think I'll ever see this in my lifetime, but I'm absolutely willing to plant the seeds for the trees that I'll never sit under. I feel like it's on my heart to do that. I don't know what else I would be doing if not this. It's an interesting time. It's absolutely an interesting time. And I don't know if everything I said today made a lot of sense, but I'm hoping that it did. I'm hoping that it inspired you to look at language a little differently, to be more considerate of the words that you're using, to pay more attention to the assumptions and presumptions that you hold when you're hearing something or when you're reading something, that you might be able to see a larger perspective around, that maybe we can move out of the binary either or and more into a yes and, so that we can see the way information proliferates and propagates through systems, that nothing is ever as cut and dry as we believe that it is, but that your perception and how you choose to receive information, articulate it back into the world, your, what did I say earlier? Your perception, which shapes your perspective, which changes what you project into the world. Can we be more mindful of that? Look for the nuance. We've lost nuance, right? In those 3-second, 10-second sound bites, we've lost nuance. And we really need to bring that back. But yeah, language is medicine. It's a powerful concept. And it sounds a little nutty on the outside until you realize that that's exactly what cognitive behavioral therapy is. Words. Language. It's how we communicate. And it is predominantly what creates the stories we tell about ourselves, the stories that we tell about the world, and that those are largely driven by how we feel in our body. Somatically, cymatically, it starts within. We reverse engineer, going, oh, how does this make me feel? I heard this thing, I did this thing, it makes me feel a certain way. Until you realize that the way that you're feeling also shapes what you say, and how what you says controls the actions that you put into the world. Really is like a dance monkey dance kind of thing, right? And then you realize that no one's actually pulling the strings. No one's making you do anything. No one's telling you what to do. You're making those choices on your own. And just to wrap this up really quickly, when I was talking about the Robin Hooding, and why I'm passionate about being able to articulate what I've experienced and what I've learned, and see if I can kind of package it in a way that makes sense and kind of crosses a lot of different sectors, if you will, which is why when I created Sovran Wellth, we have the 9 fields. It's like, how do you take all the information that's currently just jumbled and swirling around, physically, emotionally, intellectually, creatively, relationally, in your connections, vocationally, environmentally, resource-wise, spiritually, faith. How can we start to connect the dots between how those interrelate and intersect in our lives, and how one affects the other, and how it shapes our capacity to be able to take in this information, how your physical body and the strength of your physical body affects the emotional landscape that you operate in, and your emotional landscape is absolutely going to impact you intellectually and creatively and vocationally, and your ability to make money. It's going to shape the environments that you find yourself in. Everything is interrelated. But we have to be able to see what's in each of those spaces so that we can actually start to web it together, right? It's when the web starts webbing and it gets really interesting. But I'm not special. I'm just paying attention. And everyone out there who believes that they are just showing up and doing their job or pushing paper every day, if they knew what they were looking at, if they understood what they were looking at, if they had an expanded vocabulary to understand the words on the pages of the paper that they're shuffling, they may not be so quick to shuffle it, not without question, not without pushback. So yes, we can look at our elected officials, and yes, we can look at the bureaucrats that are in these higher appointed areas, but they don't exist in isolation. They don't exist. This goes from the copy room, the lowest level in an organization has so much power over how the higher echelons function. It's always top down and bottom up. It's always top down and bottom up. And if you don't ask better questions, you're not going to get better answers. If you don't dig deeper into the language that you're using, you're not going to fully understand what you're being asked to do. If you are working inside of a government agency and you don't know the legislation, or at least know how to find it and search it and look through it, that governs your department to know if what you're being asked to do is even lawful and legal, whose responsibility is it to tell you? You have to stop. When you point a finger out, you got 3 pointing back. Get more curious about this. Pay attention to what you're being asked to do. Ask questions. And if you want to learn how to ask better questions, AI. Nothing will teach you how to ask a better question than AI. Some of the most intelligent people I know are coders. And the reason I love having conversations with developers and coders is because, again, just like you can't code no without getting a 404, why no is not a complete sentence. Coders know how to ask really good questions because they can't complete what they're doing if they don't. It doesn't terminate anywhere. They have to know what questions to ask to be able to program the language into their system. So think of yourself like a computer program. What are you coding? It matters. And you can recode yourself at any time. Fascinating stuff. And I'm just a big nerd, which is why I'm sitting here right now, again, 10 o'clock in the morning, having these conversations because I enjoy having them. And I believe that one day they will be very useful. And I like hanging out with all of you who either come in live or hit my inbox after the fact. But on that note, it is 10 after 10, and I promised myself that I was only going to keep this to a half an hour, which clearly not going to happen. But the other 2 replays are up. So 4 and 5 are now live on the site. I did a weird little misnumber, so there is no episode 2. So like a hotel without a 13th floor. We just don't have episode 2. But I look forward to continuing these conversations. I've recently got connected with some independent media in the city, and they've been sending me some really interesting things that are kind of percolating below the surface. And we're having some really interesting, expansive conversations about how this information can be discussed in public settings outside of what we are traditionally seeing in fringe media, in independent media, in legacy media, because even the people doing really good work independently are still attempting to assign a villain, victim, hero. And I really think that we can move the needle much faster when we can step into neutrality, decharge the language, remove the personality, look at the pattern and the function, and then just work from there. So much easier. Because who wants to be villainized? No one. And being a victim doesn't pay. So anyway, have a beautiful Tuesday, and I will see you here, same time, same channel, next week.